The rain pounded furiously against the windshield as David sped through the deserted streets, fleeing from something he could not leave behind, his own loneliness. The roar of the engine was barely an echo compared to the turmoil inside him. In the distance, the city lights flickered through the storm, but none of that brightness could illuminate the emptiness he felt in his chest. The last betrayal had left him in an emotional abyss that no amount of money could fill. What did I do wrong this time? He thought over and over, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Jessica, the last woman he had been with, had left him the moment she realized life with him would not be an endless series of luxuries and comforts. It hadn't been a violent breakup, but it had been brutally clear. David, I don't know how you expect me to live by your side and not take advantage of your fortune. You know yourself that it's what people expect of you, she had said with a coldness that still haunted him. After several failed relationships and romantic disappointments, David had come to a painful conclusion: no one loved him for who he truly was. Each of his relationships ended the same way. The moment his money stopped flowing without limits, the people around him showed their true colors. Everything he had built over his life, his business empire, his luxury cars, his grand mansion in the hills, were now nothing more than reminders of how alone he was. That rainy night, as he drove aimlessly, David made an impulsive, almost desperate decision. If no one could see him for who he really was, then he would hide behind a different appearance, one that would let him know if there was anyone capable of loving him without knowing his wealth. It was then that he remembered Anna. He had seen Anna for the first time on a similarly gray day, while seeking refuge in a small cafe in a neighborhood he would never normally visit. She wore simple, almost modest clothes, and her face showed signs of exhaustion. Yet, even with her obvious fatigue, Anna had helped an elderly man cross the street in the rain, smiling at him with a tenderness David hadn't seen in a long time. In that brief moment, something about her moved him. He had watched her from the cafe as she continued on her way, carrying grocery bags in one hand while the other held a worn umbrella. David, in that moment, couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to live a life like hers, a life where the daily struggle wasn't about million-dollar deals but about making it to the end of the month. Something about Anna, her quiet strength, her way of facing the world with a mix of vulnerability and dignity, had left a mark on him. However, he knew his wealth would always be an insurmountable barrier to truly knowing someone like her. What if she didn't know who I am? The question haunted him now as the raindrops slid down the glass. And so, with the same swiftness that had driven him to get into his car, David decided he would return to that neighborhood. But this time, he would go in disguise. Not as the wealthy David everyone knew, but as an ordinary man, perhaps even someone in need. The next day, under the cover of a dirty cap and worn-out clothes he had found among charity donations, David walked through the streets of the neighborhood where Anna lived. He felt strange, uncomfortable, but also excited. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't being watched, judged, or admired for what he owned. His unkempt hair and the scruffy beard he hadn't shaved in days completed his disguise. No one would recognize him, and that gave him a strange sense of freedom. The air smelled of dampness and freshly baked bread as David stopped in front of the small store where he had first seen Anna. His heart raced. There she was, stepping off a small bicycle, dressed in the same modest clothes as before. She wore a faded scarf, and her face, though gaunt with exhaustion, still radiated a kind of inner peace. David approached slowly, unsure of what to say or how to act. How does one introduce themselves to someone when they are lying about who they are? But he didn't need to think too much. Anna saw him there, standing in the rain in his old clothes and with his lost expression, and without hesitation, she approached him. "Are you all right?" she asked softly, handing him a small piece of bread from her bag. Her eyes showed no pity, only genuine concern. David was speechless for a moment, surprised by her selfless kindness. It was so different from everything he had experienced up until then, that for the first time in a long time, he wondered if he had been wrong to lose faith in people. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice hoarse, feeling more vulnerable than ever. Anna smiled at him, a tired but sincere smile. "It's the least I can do," she replied before turning and continuing with her errands. David watched her walk away, feeling a mix of guilt and attraction wash over him. He had never met anyone like her, someone who, despite her own struggles, could still give to others. As she walked away with her determined yet weary steps, David couldn't help but wonder how someone like Anna could live in such a harsh world without losing her kindness. Days passed, and David continued frequenting the neighborhood, always in the same disguise, always watching from the shadows. He realized that Anna not only worked multiple jobs but also cared for her gravely ill mother in their small home. The house was worn down, but Anna kept it as best she could, never complaining. With each passing day, David's admiration for her grew, but so did his internal conflict. How am I going to tell her who I really am? David wondered as he watched her help another neighbor. What if, when I do, everything she feels for me disappears? He knew he couldn't keep hiding the truth forever, but every day spent by her side made him doubt himself and his plan more. For the first time in a long time, David felt something more than superficial attraction. He felt fear. Fear of losing the only real thing he had found in years. The bond between David and Anna had slowly developed. At first, their interactions were brief and casual, small acts of kindness from Anna and discreet responses from David, disguised as a beggar, limited himself to observing from the shadows. As David saw her more often, he found excuses to cross paths with her. He would show up in places where he knew she would be, often pretending to be in need to see if her kindness was consistent. It was. The respect and admiration he felt for Anna grew with each encounter. Despite her difficulties, Anna always had a genuine smile and a compassionate attitude. She offered him what little she had, from a sandwich to a cup of tea when she saw him near the neighborhood store. David, used to the coldness and calculations of the people in his social circle, couldn't help but feel drawn to the warmth that was so foreign to his world. One day, as they were walking through the neighborhood, Anna noticed David's worn-down appearance and stopped to offer him more than just a simple smile. "Where are you staying?" she asked, with that mix of tenderness and concern that always characterized her. David, unsure of how to respond, chose a simple lie. "I move from place to place, nothing stable." Anna looked at him more insistently, and before he could reply, she offered something he didn't expect. "If you need a place to rest, you can come to my house. It's not much, but I can offer you a hot meal." David froze for a moment. It was the first time Anna had offered him something beyond the small gestures that had defined their interactions so far. That invitation was a bridge marking a change in their relationship. A door she opened to her personal life, to the most vulnerable part of her existence. And David, carrying his lie, couldn't refuse without raising suspicion. With a sense of unease mixed with curiosity, David accepted. When they entered Anna's small house, David immediately felt the contrast with the world he knew. The home was modest but cozy. There was the smell of freshly made soup and old wood. The furniture was old and worn, but clean and orderly, a sign of the meticulous care Anna put into keeping the home in dignified condition despite the hardships. What struck David the most was the heavy silence that reigned in the house, interrupted only by the faint sounds coming from the next room. "My mother is resting," Anna explained in a whisper as she invited him to sit at the small kitchen table. David observed the details while Anna prepared tea for them both. The medications on the table, the scattered notes with medicine schedules and doctor's appointments, the mismatched chairs. Everything in that house told a story of sacrifice, of constant struggle. But what impacted David the most was Anna's serenity in the midst of all that chaos. "It's not much, but I hope it's enough," Anna said, serving 2 cups of steaming tea. David, for a moment, felt the words stick in his throat. He wanted to tell her who he really was, wanted to confess that he wasn't the homeless man she thought she was helping, but his fear of losing her stopped him. It was too late to turn back. "It's more than I could ask for," David replied, his tone more sincere than he had expected. Anna smiled, but there was a deep weariness in her eyes. In that moment, David noticed that behind her strength, behind her constant willingness to help others, Anna also carried her own battles. And he couldn't help but wonder if anyone had ever been there to care for her the way she cared for her mother. As time passed, David's visits to Anna's house became more frequent. What started as a simple offer of tea and a hot meal turned into something more. David found himself spending more and more time there, under the pretense of being a beggar in need, but in reality, seeking Anna's company and the peace he felt when he was near her. "You don't have to come every day," Anna would sometimes say, laughing, "but I'm glad to have someone to talk to. Most of the time, it's just me and my mother." That last sentence hit David like a punch to the gut. He realized how lonely Anna's life must be, always caring for her sick mother, working multiple jobs to make ends meet, and with hardly any time for herself. Yet she always found a moment to offer something, to smile. Sometimes, David helped her with small tasks. Anna, though initially reluctant to accept help from someone she considered to be in worse circumstances than her, eventually welcomed it as part of their routine. Between them, they shared moments of comfortable silences, simple gestures, and conversations about everyday things. The bond between them grew, and David felt more and more trapped in the lie he had woven. One day, while Anna was at the hospital with her mother, David, as usual, decided to help with some chores around the house. The situation was getting more serious. Anna hadn't mentioned details, but her mother's health was visibly deteriorating, and the tension was palpable. As he was organizing some papers in the small living room, something unusual caught his attention. A white envelope, hidden among a pile of old documents. Curiosity got the better of him, and David opened it. His surprise was immense when he discovered a considerable amount of cash inside. It was more than he would have expected someone like Anna to have saved in her humble home. His first thought was disbelief. Where had she gotten that money? Anna, from what she had told him, barely had enough to cover her mother's medical expenses. The weight of doubt began to creep into his mind like an insidious shadow. Distrust, the fear of being deceived once again, returned like ghosts from his past. In the days that followed, he couldn't shake the image of the envelope full of money from his mind. Was it possible that Anna wasn't as transparent as she seemed? The betrayals he had suffered in the past, the relationships that had crumbled over financial interests, all those wounds reopened at once. Every time Anna spoke to him, every kind gesture she made, David scrutinized it, searching for hidden intentions. David's internal conflict grew with each visit. On one hand, his heart told him that Anna couldn't be another person interested in his fortune because she had no idea who he really was. Every time he saw her caring for her mother or facing difficulties with a smile, he felt like he was punishing himself for doubting someone so genuine. Yet, the image of the envelope continued to haunt him, planting seeds of paranoia. That evening, as they shared a simple dinner Anna had prepared, David could no longer hold back. "Anna," he began, breaking the awkward silence that had settled between them, "how do you keep going? I mean, everything you do for your mother, how hard it must be. How do you find the strength?" Anna paused for a moment, surprised by the question. "I have no choice," she replied with a sigh. "It's not easy, but she's my mother. I'd do anything for her, even if it means sacrifices." She leaned forward and whispered, "My mother is all I have left." David felt shaken by the sincerity of her words. It was in those moments, when Anna's vulnerability became most evident, that he felt most guilty for his suspicions. Yet, he couldn't get the topic of the money out of his head. Finally, unable to bear the weight of doubt any longer, David decided to confront her. "The other day," he began, his voice tense. "I found something in your house. An envelope with a large amount of money. I can't stop thinking about it. Where did that money come from, Anna?" Anna looked at him, and for the first time since he had met her, David saw a shadow of sadness cross her eyes. "It's the money my mother saved before she got sick," she replied, her voice laden with deep exhaustion. She worked her whole life, saving little by little, to make sure I'd be okay when she could no longer take care of me. David felt as though the ground had crumbled beneath him. He had doubted the most honest and compassionate person he had ever met. The weight of his distrust and fear crushed him. He had nearly destroyed the only genuine thing he had found. The days following the confrontation between David and Anna were filled with unbearable tension. The revelation about the money's origin had not only shaken David but also created a deep crack in the trust Anna had in him. Though she didn't say it outright, it was clear that David's question had left a scar. Anna, who had always been open and generous, became more reserved, more distant. The calm moments they used to share became uncomfortable, filled with heavy silences that even the warmest tea couldn't ease. David could feel it. He knew he had failed at the most crucial moment, letting his doubts lead him down a dark path. He tried to make up for it by helping more around the house, staying longer to assist Anna with whatever she needed. But the looks that had once been full of trust and kindness were now more guarded, almost as if Anna had put up an invisible barrier between them. "You didn't have to do that," Anna said one afternoon as she sorted her mother's medications. Her tone was colder than usual. David looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. "I know, Anna. I made a mistake. It was a misunderstanding. She cut him off. "It wasn't just about the money, David. It's the fact that you didn't trust me. I thought you were different. That you could understand me. But now, I'm not so sure." The blow of her words hit hard. David had gone from being someone who had earned her trust to becoming just another person who had disappointed her. He tried to explain, but he couldn't find the right words. The distance between them continued to grow, and guilt haunted him every step of the way. As if the situation weren't complicated enough, Anna's mother's health began to deteriorate rapidly. What had once been regular hospital visits had turned into constant emergencies. Anna's pain and exhaustion became increasingly apparent, and their relationship, which had started as a refuge for both of them, had now become an additional burden. "I can't keep going like this," Anna confessed one night as she stared at the bed where her mother slept fitfully. "I don't know how much longer I can bear it. It's not just the money, it's everything. I'm tired, David." David wanted to tell her that he was there for her, that he wouldn't leave her alone. He wanted to confess the truth, who he really was, how much he admired her, and how much he wanted to help. But every time he tried to broach the subject, the fear of her rejecting him consumed him. Now, more than ever, he knew that revealing the truth could destroy whatever fragile bond they had built. The pressure on David didn't only come from his life with Anna. The real world, the one he had temporarily set aside, was starting to demand his attention. The calls from his office had become more insistent. His business partners were concerned about his prolonged absence, and his closest friend, Michael, had warned him that things weren't going well. "David, you can't keep hiding," Michael had said during a call. "There are rumors. The board is getting anxious. You need to come back or at least show some sign of life. Your absence is causing doubts." David knew he couldn't ignore his other life forever, but the idea of leaving Anna, especially now, tore him apart. Every day, he felt like he was sinking deeper into an inescapable crossroads. He needed to make a decision soon. If you are enjoying the story, don't forget to subscribe. In the midst of this emotional chaos, a new character entered the scene. One day, while David was waiting at Anna's house for her to let him in, a man approached. He had a serious look, well-dressed, with an air of authority that immediately put David on alert. "You're David?" the man asked, his voice controlled but firm. David, surprised, nodded. "I'm Matthew. I work for the family that used to employ Anna's mother, before she got sick." David tensed. He didn't know who this man was or what he was doing there, but something about his demeanor made him uneasy. How did he know his name? What connection did he have to Anna? "I've come to help Anna," Matthew continued, not waiting for a response from David. "Anna's mother asked me to support her in whatever she needed before she got sick. Now that her condition has worsened, it's my duty to make sure she's okay." David felt an instant pang of distrust. This man had appeared out of nowhere, claiming to be on a mission of help, and the way he spoke gave the impression that he knew Anna far more intimately than he was letting on. "Anna hasn't mentioned anything about you," David said, trying not to sound hostile, but unable to hide his discomfort. Matthew looked at him with a slight smile, but no warmth. "That's because she doesn't need to worry about things like this. I handle the details. But I see you've gotten close to her in my absence." Before David could respond, the door opened, and Anna appeared, surprised to see them both there. "Matthew," she said, with a mix of surprise and confusion. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see how you're doing," he replied, with a calculated look. "And to make sure everything is all right. I've spoken with some of the doctors. They told me your mother is getting worse. You need help, Anna." David felt a surge of jealousy and concern. Matthew wasn't just offering help, he seemed to know intimate details about Anna's life. And worse, the familiarity between them was evident, only adding to David's suspicions and discomfort. In the following days, Matthew's presence became more frequent. He began showing up at key moments, when Anna returned from the hospital, when she was dealing with her mother's situation, or when she seemed most exhausted. David watched from the shadows, feeling how his own place in Anna's life was beginning to waver. Anna, emotionally drained by her mother's worsening condition, accepted Matthew's help without hesitation. She seemed to trust him in a way that David couldn't understand. And although she tried to include David in some conversations, Matthew always found a way to insert himself, to show that he was indispensable in Anna's life. David, increasingly desperate, tried to reaffirm his place. He would often arrive earlier than Matthew to help with household tasks, but he always felt like he was too late. Matthew had the situation under control, and what bothered David most was that Anna didn't seem to realize how much it affected him. "Matthew just wants to help," Anna would say when David tried to bring up the issue. "He's been an important figure in our lives for years. Without him, many things would have been harder." Anna's words hit David deeply. Matthew wasn't just a stranger offering help, he was someone with a much deeper connection than David had anticipated. As Anna's trust in Matthew grew, the distance between her and David widened. One day, while Anna was at the hospital, David decided to confront Matthew. He couldn't continue enduring this man's shadow in Anna's life without understanding what was really at stake. He found him in a nearby cafe, sitting alone, as if waiting for someone. "We need to talk," David said bluntly. Matthew looked at him indifferently and gestured for him to sit down. "Tell me, David, what do you really want here?" Matthew asked, his tone as smooth as it was sharp. "Why are you so interested in Anna?" David, unsure of what to say, simply stared back. The true answer was far more complicated than he could admit. But Matthew, with a barely perceptible smile, didn't wait for his response. "I know who you are," Matthew finally said. "From the beginning. I knew you were David Wright, the millionaire. The man who disguised himself as a beggar to get close to Anna." David's heart sank. How could he know? He had never said anything, never let his real identity slip. And yet, here was Matthew, unmasking him without mercy. "Your plan was interesting, I'll give you that," Matthew continued, leaning forward. "But what you don't know is that I've been helping Anna too. Silently, from the shadows, just like you. Only my help isn't emotional. It's financial. I've been covering part of her mother's medical expenses without her knowing." The revelation left David breathless. Not only had he been hiding his identity, but Matthew had also been playing a key role in Anna's life, quietly financing her stability without asking for anything in return. "And now I ask you, David," Matthew said, his tone growing more intense, are you willing to tell her the truth? Because if you don't, I will. Anna deserves to know who you really are. I don't know what your intentions are, but I won't let you hurt her. David froze, feeling the weight of his lie crushing him. The situation had spiraled completely out of control. The plan he had devised to protect himself from further betrayals had become a trap, dragging him toward ruin. Matthew had him cornered, and now everything depended on one thing: telling Anna the truth before Matthew did it for him. The thought of losing her, of Anna finding out that everything they had shared was built on a lie, terrified him. But now he knew he couldn't keep hiding who he was. Time was running out, and the truth was about to come out, with or without his consent. The cold afternoon air felt like a crushing weight as David slowly walked toward Anna's house. Every step toward the truth brought him closer to an inevitable revelation. Matthew's words echoed in his mind, "I know who you are. If you don't tell her, I will." Fear had consumed him ever since the confrontation, and now, after everything he had done to get close to Anna, he was on the verge of losing it all. How would he tell her the truth? That thought had haunted him since he had started this deception. He wanted to be honest, but the fear that Anna would see him as a liar, just another person who had toyed with her feelings, paralyzed him. He had gone from being a man full of certainty and confidence to being lost in a sea of doubts and regrets. When he arrived at the door, David paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. He knew that what he was about to do was inevitable. If Anna found out the truth from someone else, if she heard it from Matthew, everything they had built would crumble. The worst part was that he had woven this web of lies himself, and now he was trapped in it. The weight of the deception crushed him like a stone. He had thought that by hiding his identity, he could ensure that their love would be real. But what he had done was plant the seed of an even deeper betrayal. Loving from a lie could never lead to the truth, and now he understood that. There was only one option left: confess and face the consequences. David knocked on the door, his heart racing. Anna opened it, her expression a mix of surprise and confusion. Time had changed the nature of their interactions, and although Anna no longer looked at him with the same warmth, there was something in her face that showed she hadn't entirely shut him out of her life. "David?" she asked, inviting him inside. "I wasn't expecting to see you today. Is everything all right?" Nothing's all right, he thought, but forced himself to smile. As he entered, the familiar atmosphere of the small house enveloped him. The sound of the TV playing softly in the room where Anna's mother rested, and the faint smell of herbal tea, made him feel nostalgic, as if this was the only place in the world where he could find a bit of peace, even if it was temporary. But that peace was an illusion, and he knew it was about to be shattered. David sat down in front of her at the small kitchen table, where they had shared so many simple but profound conversations. Every time he tried to start speaking, the words caught in his throat. Anna looked at him expectantly, but with the same serenity that always characterized her. She had no idea what was about to happen. "Anna, I have to tell you something," he finally said, his voice trembling slightly. She looked at him, frowning as if trying to decipher what was about to come out of his mouth. "What's going on, David?" she asked, this time with a mix of concern and curiosity. "You seem nervous." David felt a knot in his stomach, but he knew he couldn't back out now. The time had come to face the truth, and what he feared most wasn't what Anna would think of him, but what it would mean to lose her forever. I'm not who you think I am," he began, his eyes fixed on the table as he spoke. "All this time, I've lied to you, and you don't know how much I regret it. From the day we met, I wasn't honest with you. What I'm about to tell you will change everything." The silence that followed was suffocating. David slowly raised his gaze and saw how Anna's expression shifted from surprise to disbelief. "What do you mean, David?" she asked, now with a shadow of fear in her voice. He knew he couldn't keep delaying the moment. The words began to pour out quickly, like an uncontrollable flood. "I'm not homeless, Anna. I'm not the humble man I made you believe I was. I'm David Wright, a businessman, a millionaire, actually. I have a completely different life than the one you know. I came to you in disguise because I've been betrayed so many times before, and I didn't know if I could trust anyone again. I wanted to make sure that someone loved me for who I am, not for what I have. So, I hid. And I didn't tell you the truth, even when I realized how incredible you are. The silence that followed was even more suffocating than the last. Anna remained still, her face pale, and her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. Are you telling me that all of this, that everything we've shared has been a lie? She whispered, her voice shaking. No, Anna, it hasn't been a lie, David responded desperately. My feelings are real. What I feel for you is the most real thing I've experienced in years. But I know I've failed you. I lied to you, and I have no excuses for that. All I can say is that I'm deeply sorry. If you are enjoying the story, don't forget to subscribe. Anna's face twisted in a mixture of pain and betrayal. She stood up from the table, her eyes filled with unshed tears. She walked over to the window without looking at him. David, she began, her voice broken. You asked me to trust you. You showed me a part of yourself that I thought was real. But now I realize I don't know who you really are. David felt as if his heart had been ripped out of his chest. He stood as well, approaching her slowly, but he knew he shouldn't touch her. The distance between them was now emotionally insurmountable. You're right, he admitted. You didn't deserve this. I've been a coward. I hid behind a lie because I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew who I really was, you'd walk away. And now, I see that it's the lie that's tearing us apart. Anna slowly turned to face him, her eyes red from holding back tears. David, what hurts the most isn't whether you're rich or not. It's that you lied to me all this time. You made the decision for me. You decided I couldn't handle the truth. And that's something I can't forgive. I can't build anything with someone who doesn't trust me enough to be honest. The weight of her words fell on David like a final sentence. He knew she was right. He had been selfish and blind, and now he was paying the price for it. Anna, please. He begged. Tell me what I can do to make it right. Tell me how I can earn your trust back. Because I can't imagine my life without you. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes reflecting a mixture of deep pain and sadness. I don't know, David, she finally whispered. I don't know if you can. Anna's words hung in the air, filling the small room with a sense of imminent loss. David realized at that moment that he had reached the point of no return. Anna hadn't kicked him out immediately, but neither had she given him hope. He could see a wall in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a barrier that he had built himself with his lies. Anna slowly sat back down in her chair, as if the weight of the revelation had drained all her energy. Her mother was still fighting for her life in the next room, and now, on top of that burden, Anna had to face another betrayal. Even though David had never meant to hurt her, he had, and that was something he couldn't undo. I think you should go, David, Anna finally said, her voice soft but firm. The impact of her words was devastating. Despite his pleas, David knew he couldn't stay there, not in that moment. She needed space, and he had to respect that. He stood up slowly, feeling as if his body was weighed down by a burden too heavy to bear. Anna, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry, was all he could say before turning toward the door. He left the house without looking back, feeling as though the world was crumbling around him. Every step he took carried him further away from the one true thing he had found in years. And now, he faced the reality that he might never get her back. David wandered aimlessly through the neighborhood streets, his head filled with thoughts. Everything he had done, everything he had thought was right, had led him to this moment. He had tried to protect himself, he had tried to be clever, but in the process, he had forgotten the most important thing, honesty. He sat down on a park bench, his mind replaying every moment with Anna, every laugh, every conversation, every look. He realized that he had fallen into the very trap he had tried to escape. His fear of being betrayed had led him to betray someone who had never given him a reason to doubt her. The emotional challenge he now faced was the greatest of his life. It wasn't a business negotiation or a power struggle. It was a challenge with himself, with his own fears and weaknesses. If he wanted to win Anna back, he had to confront those dark parts of himself, the ones that had led him to distrust, to lie, and to hide. For the first time in a long time, David allowed himself to feel the full weight of his mistakes. To feel the vulnerability, the fear, and the sadness he had tried to avoid for so long. It was painful, but it was also liberating. Because only by acknowledging his failures could he begin to repair the damage he had caused. The days that followed were the darkest for David. He knew he had lost Anna, at least for the moment. But instead of giving in to despair, he began to think about what he could do to prove to her that he had truly changed. It wasn't enough to apologize, he had to show it through concrete actions. First, he decided to step back temporarily from his business life. He realized he had spent too much time in his world of wealth and power, and it had distanced him from the things that really mattered. He needed to reconnect with himself and the parts of his life he had left behind. And that started with helping Anna, even if she didn't want him near her. He called Michael, his closest business partner, and explained that he needed more time away from the company. Michael, surprised by David's determination, agreed to cover for him for as long as necessary. David explained the situation with Anna and her mother and how he planned to help in some way. "David, I didn't realize you were so involved in this," Michael said, concerned. "Are you sure this is the best way to solve it?" "I don't know," David replied, "but it's all I have left. I can't give up without trying." David's first step was to secretly pay all the medical bills for Anna's mother. He did it without fanfare, without telling Anna, simply ensuring that she wouldn't have to worry about the mounting hospital costs. He knew she might not accept it if she found out, but it was his way of making amends, of showing that he was willing to help her without expecting anything in return. His second step was to make a donation to a charity in Anna's mother's name, a charity dedicated to research into the disease that was affecting her. He did it discreetly, not seeking recognition. He knew these actions wouldn't repair the emotional damage, but at least they would alleviate some of the burden Anna was carrying. Finally, David decided to build a new house for Anna and her mother, a place where they could live without the limitations of their small home, which, though cozy, wasn't equipped to handle her mother's growing needs. It was a risky decision, but he wanted to show Anna that he had changed, that he was willing to make real sacrifices for her. Days passed, and although David had no direct contact with Anna, he continued helping her from the shadows. He knew he couldn't force her to forgive him, but he hoped that, over time, she would see that he was willing to do the right thing, even if it meant they would never be together again. Finally, one day, he received an unexpected call. It was Anna. "David, I need to talk to you," she said in a soft but determined voice. David felt a mix of relief and nervousness. "Of course, Anna. Where would you like to meet?" "Come to the house," she replied. "There's something I need to say." David felt the weight of the moment in his chest as he walked to Anna's house. He knew this meeting would change everything, for better or worse. It had been weeks since he had faced his lie, and during that time, he had done everything he could to show his remorse and transformation. However, until now, he hadn't had the chance to know how Anna felt about it. The fact that she had called him didn't guarantee anything. The uncertainty kept him on edge, but he also knew this meeting would bring closure, a moment of truth. He stopped in front of the door, his breathing heavy, his heart pounding. The house looked the same as always, but he was the one who had changed. He was a different man from the one who had knocked on that door for the first time, pretending to be someone he wasn't. This time, he was ready to be honest, to face whatever outcome awaited him. With a final deep breath, he knocked on the door. Anna opened with a serene expression, though her face showed signs of exhaustion, likely from caring for her mother. However, there was a calmness in her eyes, a resolution that David hadn't seen in her before. She invited him inside, and he noticed how the atmosphere in the house, though familiar, felt different, heavier. "Thanks for coming," Anna said softly as they sat down at the small kitchen table, a place that had witnessed so many conversations between them. This time, the tension was different. It wasn't the kind of tension that precedes an emotional outburst, but rather the one that accompanies a decision made, an acceptance of the truth. David nodded, unable to speak right away. His mind was filled with questions, with apologies he wanted to repeat, with promises he wanted to make, but he knew this wasn't the time to talk. Anna had something to say, and he had to listen. She looked him directly in the eyes, and for a few seconds, time seemed to stop. Finally, she began to speak. "A lot has happened since you told me the truth," she said, with a calmness that contrasted with the intensity of her words. "At first, I didn't know how to process it. The betrayal hurt me deeply. I thought I could trust you, that you were different, someone who saw the world from a more humble place. But then I realized the truth was much more complicated." David felt his heart tighten, but he remained silent, respecting the moment. "Your lie made me feel small, as if I wasn't important enough to know the truth." Anna lowered her gaze for a second, then lifted it again, more firmly. "But after thinking about it a lot, I realized something. It wasn't just your lie that hurt me. It was the distrust it planted in me, the feeling that I wasn't worthy of the truth." David swallowed hard, unable to control the knot in his throat. "Anna, I'm so sorry." He started, but she raised a hand, indicating that he should wait. "Let me finish," she said gently, and he nodded. "I've seen what you've done since then." Anna looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and pain. "I saw how you paid the hospital bills without saying anything, how you made that donation in my mother's name. And I know about the house you're building for us. All those gestures, though grand, left me wondering, why did you feel the need to do all of that to show me you care?" David looked at her, surprised by the question. It was a deep reflection, and he wasn't sure how to respond immediately. He realized that Anna wasn't looking for grand gestures but something much simpler, honesty. "I did it because I didn't know how else to show you that I'd changed." Finally, the words began to flow. "I wanted to do something tangible, something that would show you that I care, that I want to repair what I broke. But now I realize that maybe I was doing the same thing as before, trying to earn your trust with things, when what I really needed to do was be sincere. What I wanted most was to help you, not just because of the hurt I caused, but because I respect you deeply. I wanted you to know that I care about you and your mother. But above all, I wanted you to know that I love you, even if that doesn't mean anything to you anymore." David's words hung in the silence that followed. They were honest words, unadorned, and for the first time since everything had begun, David felt like he had spoken from the deepest part of himself, without trying to manipulate the situation or control the outcome. Anna observed him for what seemed like ages. Finally, she let out a sigh. "I'm not going to lie to you, David. Everything that happened changed me. It made me doubt you, but it also made me doubt myself. I thought there was something wrong with me, that I didn't deserve the truth." She paused, looking out the window toward the empty street. "But after all this time, I've realized something: none of us are perfect. We all make mistakes, and what really matters is how we learn from them." David felt a glimmer of hope in her words, though he wasn't sure what they meant for their future together. "And what I've seen in you, since that confession, is someone who's willing to change, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary." Anna looked him directly in the eyes. "That's what's made me reconsider everything." David remained silent, waiting for her final verdict. "I can't promise you that everything will go back to the way it was," she finally said, with a mixture of sadness and determination. "But what I can say is that I'm willing to give you a chance. Not because of what you've done, but because I see that you've changed. And because I think we've both learned something important from all of this." The relief that washed over David was indescribable. It wasn't the perfect answer, it wasn't a promise that everything would be easy from now on, but it was a chance. A chance to rebuild, to prove that he had truly changed. And that was more than he had dared to hope for. "Thank you, Anna," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I won't let you down." She smiled slightly, a tired but genuine smile. "I know, David." Her words were simple, but within them was an implicit promise of renewed trust. "We both have to heal, and that will take time." In the days that followed, David began to experience a deep transformation within himself. Though the tension between him and Anna hadn't completely disappeared, there was a new openness between them, a more honest foundation upon which they could begin to build. And while he knew it would be a slow process, he also understood that this time, he didn't need to prove anything with grand gestures. What Anna needed was to see a man who could be vulnerable, honest, and willing to accept his own mistakes. David also began to reflect on his life before Anna, how he had allowed fear and distrust to dominate his relationships. He had spent so much time protecting himself from others that he had forgotten what it really meant to trust and to be trustworthy. Anna had been the catalyst for his change, but he understood that the work of transformation had to continue, regardless of what the final outcome of his relationship with her would be. One morning, while walking through the park, David realized something fundamental. His life no longer revolved around protecting himself from others or ensuring that no one could hurt him. He had learned that true value wasn't in his wealth or in what he could offer others materially. True value was in vulnerability, in the ability to open up, even when there was a risk of being hurt. He had found in Anna not just someone to love, but a way of being that had challenged him to change. It had been a painful process, full of mistakes and regrets, but it had also been a path to redemption. For the first time in a long time, David felt at peace with himself, not because he had gotten everything he wanted, but because he had found a new way of living, one in which he could be honest, authentic, and vulnerable without fear of the consequences. Over time, the relationship between David and Anna began to strengthen. It wasn't an easy process, and they often had to confront difficult conversations, face the wounds that were still fresh. But every small step forward was a victory. David understood that Anna didn't need more grand gestures, she needed to see that he was committed to being an honest and open person. The project for the new house continued, but this time, David allowed Anna to be involved in every decision. He no longer tried to shield her from his generosity or hide his wealth. She had accepted his position, but more importantly, she had accepted that what they shared went beyond money or material possessions. One day, as they both visited the site where the house was being built, Anna looked at him with a soft smile. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she said, laughing. David nodded, a deep sense of gratitude filling him. "Yes, we have. And I wouldn't change it for anything." Anna took his hand, a simple gesture but one loaded with meaning. They didn't need more words in that moment. Both knew that the journey they had traveled together, though full of obstacles, had brought them to this point. A point where trust, honesty, and love were beginning to bloom, this time in a much more real and profound way. David and Anna's story didn't end with a perfect closure, but that's what made it real. They had both changed deeply throughout their journey, facing their own fears and learning to trust again. David, in particular, had undergone a profound emotional transformation. He had learned to be vulnerable, to admit his mistakes, and to stop hiding behind his wealth or his fear. He didn't know what the future held for them, but that was okay. What he had learned was far more valuable than any concrete outcome. He had found the courage to be honest with himself and with others, and that was what really mattered. As they walked together into the future, David knew that, no matter what happened, he had grown. And although the path had been difficult, in the end, he had found something far more important than success or money, the ability to love and be loved authentically, without fear of what would come next.